September 13th, 2022, meeting of the Planning Board to order, please. Before I ask for roll call, I'd like everyone to know that silencing cell phones in the audience and for members would be appreciated, and that this meeting is being recorded. Karen, would you call the roll, please?
Jim Callahan?
Here.
Bob Doherty?
Here.
Kevin Donovan?
Here.
Dave Edmonds?
Here.
Carolyn Turner?
Here.
Mike Ventura?
Here.
Chair Claudia Bogan?
Here. We are going to take, under subdivisions, 6 Freiburg Road out of order, and we are discussing a preliminary subdivision plan, and the petitioner is Marion Kane.
Good evening. Just wanted to give a brief
Sir,
introduction.
I'm sorry, could you just state your name and address for the
Yep,
record, please?
Patrick Kane. I'm Marion Kane's grandson. I live at 27 Intervale Road in Woburn currently.
Excellent, thank you, welcome.
I just wanted to give a brief introduction before I give the floor to our engineer, Mark. My name is Patrick Kane. I'm accompanied by my cousin, Meredith Wells. She's the other party for the subdivision at 6 Freiburg Road. 6 Freiburg Road was owned by our grandfather, George Kane, and his wife, Marion, who has graced us with her presence. She recently moved to Country Club Heights, and we had an opportunity, really a great opportunity, to potentially, build that forever home on our family's land. Moreover, in Central Square, where, our parents grew up, I grew up, and we would like to, have our families grow up here forever. So I just want to say thank you for taking a look at this plan, and I'll give the floor to Mark. Thanks, Mark.
All right, thank you. Mr. Schlager, welcome. Could you state your name and address for the record, please?
Mark Slager from Allen Engineering, here on behalf of the Kane family. As Patrick mentioned, they've got a piece of property on 6 Freiburg Road, and they're interested in trying to subdivide it. It has less than 200 feet of frontage on Freiburg Road, so there would be a need to create a new roadway to generate enough frontage for the second lot. You can see faintly here, there's the existing house down underneath where it says Lot 1. That house would be raised, and then the roadway would be constructed, and 2 new homes would be put in there. We did get some comments back from Building Commissioner, Mr. Quinn, and also from the Fire Chief, and I'll touch on those in a few minutes. But going through the layout of the subdivision, we're proposing a 40-foot wide right-of-way with 24 feet of pavement. And also, for turnaround purposes, we could propose a grass paver turnaround so that it's not a tremendous amount of pavement. We're proposing this based on some of the other subdivision roads that have been approved recently, specifically Sherman Terrace, although that was a unique case where it was an existing right-of-way and it was just being upgraded to accommodate the homes and 1 additional home. That road actually has 4 driveways on it. This one, we're only proposing 2, with basically the house in the back having the majority of the roadway to itself. So we're here as a preliminary plan to just get some feedback from the board on their thoughts on what we're trying to achieve, and maybe discuss the turnaround, and then maybe, comment on some pavement width reductions if possible, or reducing granite curbing and making the end of the road past the driveway for Lot 1 a little bit more of a residential style driveway, since it's only going to serve 1 lot. So those are the things I'd like to hear feedback from the board on this evening. The family is somewhat anxious to hear your feedback as well, so they can make their plans for the future for this property as well. With respect to Mr. Quinn, he had a concern that having a curb cut here would violate the zoning ordinance that restricts curb cuts to 24 feet at the property line. I'm not sure where he's coming from with that, because this is basically a cut and paste from what was already approved at Sherman Terrace. So I'll have to have a conversation with him about that. And then the fire chief was concerned with the ability to access the, around these corners, especially if there was some parked cars out on Freiburg Road. So he has some concern about that. We haven't met with him in person to go over all of his details, but we certainly, if we get some positive feedback from the board tonight, we would certainly make him one of our first stops as well, since public safety is always everybody's concern with this. So, with that, I'd like to turn it back over to the board and be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have 2, 3, 4, 5, everybody here today in person, so I'm expecting some great discussion and questions. So who would like to lead off? Jim, go right ahead.
First question is why the grass strip versus a hammerhead or a cul-de-sac?
There isn't enough lot area to accommodate a cul-de-sac at the end. You can see the lot areas were just over 13,000 here and just over 12,000. So we couldn't accommodate a cul-de-sac and not have enough land left over. It may be possible to acquire additional land from the neighbors. That hasn't really been discussed yet. We'd, just for financial considerations, we'd rather try and do it on just the property that we have. A T turnaround, we've also looked at that, and if you have a T at the end, again, that cuts into the amount of area that's available for the second lot.
Now, this roadway's gonna be a public roadway? Is that what you're?
No, not at all. It would be a private roadway, privately maintained, private plowing. So it wouldn't be under Jay Duran's purview.
That's all my questions at this time, thank you.
All right, Jim, thank you. Are there other questions from the board?
Madam Chair,
Mike, go right ahead.
I mean, there's a substantial amount of waivers here. I mean, you kind of really in a tough bind here with the lot size. Even, you know, the area, and you found that turnaround, like Jim had mentioned, is you don't have the area to do a legit cul-de-sac.
Correct.
Yeah, I believe, have we gotten feedback from, I believe there was something from the fire about using that material for a subsurface turnaround?
They did express concern in their most recent letter. They expressed concern about their ability to make a turn onto the street, given the, the reduced size radius entering into the site, and the fact that there could be cars parked on the roadway at the same time, plus the 24-foot roadway width rather than 26. I don't remember that their current letter mentions anything about the turf turnaround.
Okay, okay. So along those lines, is the configuration in these building envelopes, have you tried to orientate it such that you could get a decent-sized bulb in there?
I've looked at it a bunch of different ways, trying to fit a cul-de-sac in there. You know, you're looking at the front setback being 25 feet, so we're pretty close to that, and we've got side setback issues. You know, possibly if I were to do it in an easement format rather than a fee over ownership of the roadway, I might be able to squeeze something, but I don't think it would even come close to being something that could accommodate a, you know, a decent-sized truck.
Yeah, I mean, some of these waivers, I mean, you know, could kind of be, I could be kind of convinced to go along with, but it's just, there's a lot of them. I mean, you know, when we're talking about, you know, the safety of, you know, the people that are living there and the ability for vehicles to get in there and turn around, that's an area of concern. You know, would have to, you know, really think long and hard about that.
I've thought about that too, and I've tried looking at it a different way. You know, the first thought is when you're looking at this plan, it's, you're looking at a house in the front and trying to get a second lot in the back. But being an engineer, I like to look at both sides of the coin. And if I could open up this. What we could really look at is if we had the ability to just take away the front house, we could put the house in the back like this, and you wouldn't need a turnaround, you wouldn't need a roadway, you wouldn't need anything. There's no concerns with public safety to access that lot. Then, once that's done, if you looked at, well, how can I get another house in here, then you would need to create a roadway for frontage. But given that you can do this without the need for a full-size turnaround and whatnot, I don't think there's a significant public safety issue, considering it's only one house in the back. And then, go back to that other one. So for example, this house in the back is really only going to be one house accessing off of this road. There's no frontage being created for any adjacent land to access this, so it's basically just a roadway to service one lot. The only people that are going to be coming in there are people that are either going to Lot 2 or visiting Lot 2, or maybe a FedEx truck or a UPS truck. I live on a driveway that's about 150 feet long, and there's a house behind me that has no frontage. And when they have UPS deliveries, either the truck driver, depending on who it is, will either back up the driveway, make his delivery, and then leave, or he'll just park out on the main road and walk up the driveway and make his delivery. From a fire department perspective, I could see their need to get in there. But again, if it's only a 12-foot driveway for one house, it's really not much different than what we're looking at here. If the house were to be positioned in back. So it's really not a substantial public safety issue, in my opinion. But I could talk to the fire chief about that, because maybe he's concerned with the road being extended to some of the adjacent land, when that's not the case, and we could put any restrictions on there that would prevent that from happening. So
Mark, so what you're saying, basically what you're showing there is a shared driveway.
basically, yeah. But in order to satisfy the zoning bylaw, we need to have 100 feet of frontage on a roadway that's built to town standards, whatever the planning board determines those town standards or city standards to be as appropriate for the situation. So again, it'll be privately maintained. I don't envision any trash trucks going up there either. I think it's a matter of just bringing the trash receptacles out to Freiburg Road and moving on, just like it's a common driveway. And if the construction standards were much more relaxed, like a narrower pavement and maybe eliminating the curbing, it would look more like a residential driveway, and it wouldn't encourage other vehicles from thinking that it's a through road, along with the appropriate signage.
Okay, thanks, I mean, it's,
Are you set?
yeah, I am, Claudia, thank you.
Great. Carolyn, are you?
Actually, yeah, I do have a question. One of the diagrams that was provided in the packet It looks like there was a bulb drawn. Was this an alternative consideration?
Yeah, that was,
Point?
that was an early version of just trying to see what we could try and fit and how much adjacent land would be needed to try and accommodate a full turnaround.
And is that something that still could be considered?
I don't know at this point. I don't think there's been any discussions about that with any of the neighbors.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else with any other comments? Jim, go right ahead.
I missed the first opportunity, but what's the length of the driveway from Freiburg to the,
It's roughly 200 feet, 205 feet or so.
thank you.
Gina?
I had two questions.
Sure.
What is the I know you show the water and sewer lines on the plan. What's the diameter of the water?
Whatever the regulations require, I believe it would be an 8-inch water main.
And sewer?
Sewer would also be 8-inch.
12, according to the city's regulations. City's regulations call for a minimum sewer of 12.
12-inch for residential?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's what they would be,
okay.
as far as you know.
Whatever, yep.
Tina, are you good?
I'm good, thank you.
All right. So, my comment, Mark, is this visually looks like something that was very prevalent 20-something years ago when I first got on the board. It looks like a pork chop. And at that time, there was a lot of that sort of development going on in the city. And as a board, at that time, we looked very carefully at our subdivision rules and regulations and made a policy judgment to basically keep to them because of the way that the vision of subdivisions in the city from this board was being expressed. So I just mention that because it's been a very long time since I've seen something, like this. I know that there have been a couple of things come in that for a variety of reasons look like this, but I'm not sure it was simply for the reason that there's not enough land to do what you want to do within the rules, so we're looking at a pork chop. So I just want to be clear, not pejorative or anything like that, but this is something that we really haven't been asked to do very often in the 20-something years I've been here, because at the very outset of my tenure, the board made very clear that that's not what they wanted to see when we made our rules up. So with that, if there's no other comments from the board, I would ask the planning director if there is any sort of recommendation.
So I will say that I'll start with something that I had shared with Mr. Slager earlier and with Attorney Salvati, and that is that this form of a turnaround, a sort of a turf turnaround, if you will, was something that the board started when it was looking at a project off of Cambridge Road, I think, and they had room for half of a cul-de-sac or 2/3 of one, but not a complete bulb. It was an existing right-of-way, and they were adding the cul-de-sac at the end. And so we added a sort of a turf area for the fire department to be able to make a full 3-point turn if they wanted to. And we have used it in other applications. But my concern is that if this is to serve as effectively the turnaround for the subdivision, it's going to be invisible. Once it's installed, the grass goes through it, and it looks largely like lawn. And I'm not sure an Amazon driver or a UPS truck or an oil delivery vehicle would say, I bet I can drive over that lawn and use that as my turnaround or a place for a 3-point turn. So I just generally want to caution the board, or at least share my concern about using this as the means of turnaround for any subdivision, because I'm not sure it's as obvious to the users that it's available as a paved cul-de-sac would be. I think this is a difficult thing, because I know this is a family issue. There's a young family that wants to build its, quote, forever home. So this is a little hard to say, but I'm looking at this from the perspective of the city and the planning board. it seems clear that there's not enough land here to do a conforming roadway. Obviously, if there was, you would have done it. And in fact, there's a requirement for about a dozen waivers of all sorts of regulations that, in all honesty, have already been decided by the city a long time ago as standards when they adopted their rules and regulations. Everything from the roadway width for pavement and layout to the lack of a cul-de-sac, no sidewalks, all sorts of, like I said, about a dozen waivers all in that are necessary to try to build one more house at the end of now in New Street. The board has seen a lot of existing rights-of-way that are 40 feet wide that were laid out decades ago that already have homes on them. And developers are looking to add one more lot on them at the end. And the board has grappled with that, and they have not been easy, and they've been frankly sometimes very difficult because they're trying to get, this sounds pejorative, but I guess I'll say it, trying to squeeze one more house into an existing neighborhood that already has, a fair density. It's a difficult situation for any neighborhood. Here, the board's being asked to waive a dozen of its requirements to allow a substandard roadway to be installed. And one of the concerns, a great concern I have, is that if the board were to entertain and approve a plan like this, every engineer and every attorney that follows you would come in and point to the board and say, remember what you did at 6 Freiburg? Even this evening, I heard you mention another subdivision at least twice as examples of a time when the planning board had approved something, and you mentioned it as if, you've done it once, so, perhaps it's okay to do again. So I think the extreme number of waivers, and it is a relatively extreme number, the fact that this is not an existing right-of-way that we're dealing with, but one that we're laying out for the first time in the manner in which you've asked, I think that I would recommend to the board that most of the waivers not be granted and that the planning board consider not approving this preliminary. It may not violate the residential maximum driveway width of 24 feet. That's to be decided or determined. And there was also a question about whether or not this roadway was at least 25 feet away from the nearest house. There is a zoning provision for that. No one's done the measurement. I don't know if it violates that provision, but it might because no one has been asked to do that calculation yet. So in the end, I would recommend, my recommendation to the board is that you consider turning down, not granting the waivers, and then voting to turn the subdivision down for the reasons that I mentioned, the 2 potential zoning violations and the waivers not being granted.
All right, thank you. Are there questions for the planning board director or any comments?
Madam Chair, just a question as far as the process goes as a preliminary subdivision. I know it's different than a definitive subdivision. So what does that really entail? Does that mean they can no longer move forward, or?
No, as a matter of fact, they would be entitled to consider the denial and, or whatever the way the board voted, and then come back to you with a definitive plan. It does not preclude them from filing a definitive plan for you to consider later on.
I know there was a distinction, I just kind of jogged in my mind.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, does the board have any other questions or comments? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Excuse me. I'll make a motion to accept the director's recommendation.
All right, there is a motion by Bob on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dave. Is there any discussion? No discussion. I would like to call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, which has been duly seconded, please raise your hand. All right, that is all in favor, none opposed.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. Good luck. All right, next on the agenda, we are going to go back to our regular agenda, which is under public hearings. Public hearing continued, special permit / site plan review. Application to authorize light manufacturing use of approximately 33,514 square feet within a new 2-story building containing approximately 133,738 square feet of net floor area at 216 New Boston Street. Attorney Tarby, welcome.
We just need a minute to set up.
Not at all. Attorney Tarby,
216?
216.
216 New Boston Street continuance?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, I thought, tough hearing through the mask. Yes, we wish to continue that. We're still waiting for the, we've responded to the peer reviewers. We're waiting to hear back from the peer reviewers as to our responses, so that they can make a recommendation to the city engineer, who can then write a memorandum to both the planning board and city council relative to the appropriate mitigation. So we're hoping we can get this wrapped up in the next couple of weeks, and would ask to continue this to the next meeting.
Okay. So with regard to that, I just wanted to put into the record that Mike Ventresca has executed a missed hearing certification that makes him available to vote on 216 New Boston Street at the next meeting if the board decides to go ahead and grant the continuance. So, is there any comment, Tina, from the planning board director on the request for continuance?
Nope, support for the motion, or support for the request, excuse me.
All right, the applicant is requesting a continuance of the 216 New Boston Street hearing to September 27th, 2022. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Dave, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Carolyn. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'd call for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 in favor. Bob is abstaining.
And was that for 7 PM?
Yes, it was for 7 PM. Thank you for catching that, Tina. All right, next, under public hearings, the continued public hearing for the proposed zoning amendment to amend the City of Woburn zoning ordinance by adding a new section 32 entitled Life Sciences and Business Mixed Use Overlay District, known as the LBOD, and B, amend the Woburn zoning map to overlay the new LBOD district onto the parcels shown on Woburn Assessor's maps as Map 29, Block 1, Lot 1, Map 29, Block 1, Lot 2, Map 29, Block 1, Lot 3, Map 29, Block 1, Lot 4, and Map 29, Block 1, Lot 5. TD Development Group LLC is the petitioner, and Attorney Tarby is here on their behalf. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. We're going to be using a PowerPoint presentation tonight, so we have copies of the PowerPoint we'd like to submit to the board.
All right, motion to submit in the public record
So moved.
by Dave, second by Jim. All in favor? 3,
Okay, there's 9 copies.
7 in favor, none opposed. Sorry, my counting today is lax. I'm going to go sit next to this side of the room so I can see your presentation.
You want to look backwards? You don't want to look backwards?
I don't want to look backwards. I don't have eyes in the back of my head. Awesome, thank you.
Okay, before we begin, I'd like to introduce the members of our team that are here this evening. If you could just raise your hand when I read off your name. From the Davis Companies, we have Mike Cantalupa, Chief Development Officer, Chris Mora, Vice President of Real Estate, Pat Noon, Vice President of Real Estate, and Taribi Joseph. Also, we have Tim Williams of Allen and Major, Scott Thornton of Vanasson Associates, Dr. Antonio Puglisi of Safety Partners, and Joshua Philbrook of Den's Facility Services. So if you want to go to the next slide, Taribi. All right, so the presentation tonight, what we've done is there were a series of questions that were raised at the Planning Board public hearing, the first one we had, the City Council public hearing, City Council Ordinance Committee. And what we've done, we've taken all of those questions and placed them in these four areas. So we're going to have a number of members of our team that are going to address each one of those questions. So just want to also review the petitions that are before you, as well as what we've submitted to date. So We've submitted for the record a comparison of the LBOD filed in 2021 with the version filed in July of 2022. We've filed a memorandum dated June 28, 2022 that outline the extensive permitting requirements and the authority of the planning board and the city council, and a PowerPoint presentation at the first planning board public hearing, and this being the second PowerPoint presentation. In terms of the permitting process, where we had a city council public hearing on August 16th. That was continued to September 20th. We had an ordinance committee meeting a couple of weeks ago, and then the planning board public hearing, August 23rd was the first one. That was continued to September 13th. So we can go to the next slide, Taribi. So I'm going to go over what changed between the original submission in 2021 and what we submitted in 2022. So with the proposed ordinance that we submitted in July of this year, what we've done is we've placed the focus on advanced light manufacturing and research and development. In addition, we've added clear definitions that were suggested by the planning director during the review of the 2021 version of the LBOD. And those definitions include advanced light manufacturing, life science, groups H2 and H3 use, which I'd like to just comment on for a second. You know, that's a use that's accessory and limited to life science, laboratory, advanced light manufacturing, research and development. That use is further defined by the International Building Code and limited to 10% of the gross floor area of a floor. Go to the next slide. So further, we've restricted the biomedical facilities on the site to be bio-level 1, bio-level 2, as defined by the National Institute of Health. So that this restriction is also consistent with Section 2-223A of the Woburn Municipal Code, which sets forth the regulations for the City of Woburn Biomedical Oversight Committee. Under that municipal code, only BL1 and BL2 uses are allowed. In addition, as part of the process, in addition to coming to the planning board at a public hearing, going to the city council at a public hearing and committee meetings, getting feedback from the fire department, you know, a separate permit is required from the Biomedical Oversight Committee. As I said at the last meeting, as of your last public hearing, there were 54 permits issued for life science, manufacturing, and lab uses in the city of Woburn, according to report we received from the Board of Health. We further have added additional regulations that give the council the authority to impose reasonable and necessary conditions to ensure that users of the surrounding property are adequately safeguarded. We also moved the minimum required setback from the building to the zoning district line from 125 feet to 200 feet. One of the comments that was in the planning director's correspondence back in 2021 was to make sure the measurement was from the building to the zoning district, and that's what we've done. In addition, we've removed mixed use from the life science and business section. And then a couple other things that we did that were recommended by the planning director is that we included under building parking, that's within the definition of height. Okay, as you know, under the Woburn zoning ordinance, the height definition starts above the slab of the parking structure underneath. We also reduced the percentage of structures that could be located on the roof from 15% of the roof area to 7% of the roof area. We also corrected a revision that we were asked to correct. So in terms of the high hazard use, this ordinance does not have high hazard use as a primary use. As I just said, those, yes,
That bothers me. A primary use means 51%.
that,
Can you be more specific? A primary use, high hazard, 49% of the use would be less than primary, right? So can you affix a percentage of what you consider to be,
it's 10% of the floor area.
will be high
of a-
hazard, could be high hazard?
No, not, it's gonna
That's
be.
what I want to know.
Well, what we've done is under high hazard uses under the International Building Code, and I'll let our safety experts speak to this in a few minutes. There are a number of uses under the topic of high hazard use. We're limiting it to group H2 and H3.
Right, but you're saying it's not a primary use. My
Correct.
concern is, what do you define as a secondary use?
There's going to be an accessory use, but limited to life science, advanced light manufacturing, and research and development uses. Right now, the City of Woburn zoning ordinance lists high hazard use as a principal use. Okay, we're wiping that out.
All right, but you're saying there will be some high hazard use. You're not,
You know, I'm not qualified to answer. We do have questions that will address that if,
the only reason I'm asking is this thing weighs a ton, and
Yeah.
I'm getting older by the minute, and, 40 pages from now, I might not remember. So that just is something,
yep, but we're gonna address that during our presentation.
okay.
So the revision to limiting this to an accessory use was as a result of feedback we received from the city council and others. So at this point, we're going to go through a number of questions that we've heard, from neighbors, from the planning board, from the city council, and we're going to start with Scott Thornton, who will address some of the traffic issues that have come up.
Good evening. For the record, Scott Thornton with Vanessa and Associates. I'm going to go through a few slides on traffic. A couple of the comments we've received had to do with how we're mitigating the impact on traffic and what the traffic impact is on the fire station that's opposite the Canal Park Drive. So if the overlay is approved, we would expect to prepare a full traffic study that would be scoped out with the city engineer. And we would anticipate looking at intersections to the north, part of the Rotary, Fisher Terrace, True Place, locations to the south as well, Wilcox, Eaton Street, as well as other locations that I'm sure the city engineer would include. In terms of the signal equipment, you probably realize that as a condition of the fire station going in, that signal equipment's been upgraded and has a bunch of high reflectivity devices around the signal heads. It's all new signal heads and mast arms. So that's all new traffic equipment. And in terms of the impact on the fire station, we would expect that the project would have minimal impact. When the fire station gets a call, all the approaches would go to red, clear out the intersection. The fire engines would be able to circulate out through the driveway onto Main Street. The next slide, we ran a couple hypotheticals as to the trip generation of the proposed development in comparison with other uses that are allowed by special permit. So there's things like office, shopping center, medical office, a discount store or home improvement store that could go in there with special permit. So during the weekday morning time period, and again, this is for the same size development of 200,000 square feet, the proposed use would generate less traffic than all these uses that were reviewed, with the exception of the shopping center, and that's only because the shopping center, being a retail use, isn't, most of the stores wouldn't be open during the morning time period. The next slide shows the evening comparison. You can see that the proposed use would generate less traffic than all of those potential uses. In some cases, 4 times less traffic than some of these other uses that could be allowed by special permit. So, so I think that's it for traffic. I'll turn it over to Tim Williams to talk about wetlands. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Board. For the record, Tim Williams with Allen and Major Associates. And one of the questions that we have heard throughout the process was, what's the impact of the development on the wetland areas, and how do we intend to maintain those wetland areas? Essentially, the proposed development is going to stay within the existing paved surfaces that is out in the parking lot adjacent to the cinema. If you're not aware, there's a large wetland area to the south, kind of between the cinema and Lowell Street. There are 2 detention basins in there that need to be constructed. So any work, reconstructed, so any work that we need to do, we work in conjunction with the Conservation Commission, who will ultimately take jurisdiction over that. But we have made commitments to fix the drainage issues that have been ongoing out there over the years. So, you know, to reiterate, there will be no direct impacts to the wetlands. There'll be no alterations. We'll certainly be working within the buffers, but we'll be under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so Chris.
Good evening. For the record, Chris Moore with the Davis Companies. Another question we received in the last few meetings was with regards to shadow studies from the buildings onto the adjacent properties, primarily on Ellen Road. So we did that, and I apologize, this slide is sort of like a bird's eye view with north pointing to the bottom right of the screen. And the properties on Ellen Road are off to the right side, on the other side of those trees that you see there. So the case that we analyzed is actually the winter solstice, which tends to be the most amount of shadow that a building casts on a surrounding property, just from the orientation of the sun. And we looked at the condition at 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. And what you can see, obviously, as the sun oscillates, the shadow direction changes. And Taribi, if you go, well, before you do that, you can see that the worst case scenario happens at 8 a.m. on the winter solstice, when the majority of the shadow is being casted towards Ellen Road. So if you go to the next slide, we've isolated what percentage or what shadow is actually coming from the proposed new buildings versus the line of trees on the backside of the properties on Ellen Road. And you see that our shadow is not even projected to reach the properties on Ellen Road. This is actually a benefit of the shift that you guys may remember we did, and we presented last time, where we actually moved the buildings away from those residential properties.
Good evening. Joshua Philbrook with Dens Facility Services, for the record. Dens Facility Services, we support life science clients throughout Greater Boston and work in a number of these buildings. And one of the questions that was posed to us in one of our last meetings was, in terms of this proposed development, does a gas station have more flammables than this building? Under the H2 classification, we would be allowed to store 360 gallons of a Class 1B flammable liquid. That would be also in a space that's fully sprinklered, and all of the gases in containers that are fire-proof. To compare that with a typical community gas station, you're looking at 12,000 to 24,000 gallons of a Class 1B flammable liquid. So the amount of flammable liquids, Class 1B flammable liquid, that would be stored at any given time on the first floor control area of one of these buildings would be about 1.5% to 3% of what you would see at a typical community gas station. On the next slide, you'll see we just kind of compared this to a fish tank of about 360 gallons relative to a gas tanker, so 2 tanks at 11,600 gallons each. Just to give you a sense of the volume delta that we're looking at between this proposed development and what you would see at your local gas station. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Antonia Pugliese from Safety Partners. One of the other questions that was raised is what are we going to do about safety regarding the fact that this facility is close to a school and a daycare center? So there isn't a really any specific regulations or rules that would have to be followed due to the proximity to those. But obviously, it's very, very important to keep children safe. So really, what we would be relying on is that the building, the landlords, and also all of the tenants would have to be compliant with all the regulations that I've talked about at various other meetings that would be keeping the whole community safe. So keeping the school, keeping the daycare, keeping all of the surrounding residents and anyone just passing by safe. That would all come down to a long list of regulations that they need to follow, and this is my sort of boring list for you. It is not all-inclusive. There are more regulations that would apply, but these are some of the really key ones. A lot of OSHA regulations, the Environmental Protection Agency, Massachusetts Sanitary Code, and of course, at the local level, the fire department and that biomedical oversight committee. So staying compliant with all those rules would keep all of the things in the area safe.
Chris?
So another question that we heard was about this proposed development relative to residential buildings, and if we had examples of other similar developments in other neighboring communities to Woburn. So what we've done here, just to refresh everybody's perspective on the site, what we've done here is we've actually taken measurements, as Joe indicated earlier in the presentation. The language in the LBOT references the residential district line, which is that sort of corner point that we have on 11 Allen Road, and that we're setting that to a minimum of 200 feet. The actual distances from our buildings to all the properties along Allen Road, you can see them noted, and they range from 660 feet down to about 332 feet. And just for the purpose of understanding what that looks like, that's at a minimum, a football field, as everybody knows, is about 300 feet. So you're looking at a distance setback from the property, the current properties to our proposed development, just approximately over a football field in distance. If you go to the next slide. So what I'm going to do now is compare this proposed development to, in this next series of slides, to other developments that have this type of facility. So what we've done here first is taking a look at our proposed development, and we've also tried to capture how many housing units and the total population that it's within close proximity to the site. You can see for the, we selected a quarter-mile radius. That is somewhat the same as the 1,500-foot setback that in the City of Woburn bylaws. So for the purposes of discussion here, we've done these comparisons relative to a quarter-mile. You can see that for a proposed development, you're ranging anywhere from 222 units, and that translates to about 620 people that live within a quarter-mile radius of the facility. If you go to the next slide, here's an example of 100 Beaver Street in Waltham, where the nearest home is about 90 feet away from the facility. And if we go to the next slide, similar comparison, that's about 262 units within a quarter-mile radius, resulting in a population of about 600 people living within close proximity to this facility. If you go to the next one, 40 Seaton Street in Waltham as well. That one is about 430 feet away from the nearest home. And if you go to the next slide, that results in about 365 housing units and about an 800 total population within a quarter-mile radius. Next example that we have for you here is 66 Galen in Watertown, roughly about 80 feet. This one is in construction, by the way, roughly about 80 feet away from a residential home. And if you go to the next slide, that results in about 900 housing units and a population of roughly 1,800 folks living within a quarter-mile radius of this facility. You sort of see what the pattern on these examples is. 480 Arsenal Street in Watertown as well. The setback there to the residential building is about 150 feet. And if you go to the next slide, that same quarter-mile radius results in about 600 housing units and a population of almost 1,300 people. I think we have one or two more examples. 1050 Waltham Street in Lexington. This one is actually in construction, very close to where I happen to live. It's about 160 feet offset from the nearest residential unit. And if you go to the next slide, it's about 285 units and about a population of 700 people living within close proximity to this site. And I believe this is the last example that we have, 400 Technology Square in Cambridge, about 50 feet away from the facility. And if we do the same exercise, about 1,200 housing units and a population of roughly 3,000 people within a quarter-mile radius of this site. So just tabulating all those examples that I just went through, you can see that where we stack relative to the sample size. Again, these are distances measured from building to building, essentially, and how we stack relative to the number of housing units within that quarter-mile radius and the total population that lives within that quarter-mile radius. You can see that for all these primarily suburban communities that have similar type of facilities, we are actually falling right in line with those metrics, if not actually less number of housing units and less number of people living in close proximity to the facility.
Thanks, Chris. Tim and Scott.
One of the other questions we received was how are we going to control the effluents from the facility? All lab and manufacturing effluents that will be put down a sink in this space will have to go through permitting through the MWRA. As part of that, all waste will go into a pH neutralization tank, would require inspections on a daily basis by a licensed individual, as well as periodic inspections and testings from the MWRA. So it's very highly controlled and monitored at all times. In addition, if they're relative to any liquid spills, that would all be self-contained. If there was a spill that would be treated by a licensed waste hauler that would support the facility if there were to be a small spill in the space. Otherwise, everything else is going to be self-contained with spill control.
You can stay on that slide if you don't mind. So again, Tim Williams with Allen Major, and as Josh had mentioned, the site is going to be required to get a general permit through the MWRA because Woburn is an MWRA community on the sewer side. And essentially what the regulations say, 310 CMR 10, is a laboratory covered by the general permit shall have and implement a written laboratory chemical management plan to control the discharge of regulated materials to the sewer system. Regulated materials are those that contain pollutants regulated by the authority at 360 CMR 10 through, at a minimum, the plan shall include procedures to ensure that regulated materials do not spill or leak into the sewer system, eliminate or minimize the disposal of regulated materials to the sewer system so that authority discharge limits are met, properly handle, store, collect, and dispose of laboratory chemicals and maintain disposal manifests, train laboratory employees in proper laboratory chemical usage and disposal, and ensure the laboratory chemical management plan is followed, among other measures, posting appropriate notices of proper chemical usage and disposal practices at the sinks where laboratory chemicals are used. So again, any kind of sewer effluent will be monitored and regulated by the MWRA, and a permit will be required. Another comment that we heard was relative to the actual sewer system itself. If you're not aware, there's a large trunk line that runs through the center of the cinema site. We heard concerns about what we were going to do to investigate and protect that sewer pipe. And what we'll do is we'll work with the city engineering department and the DPW and do whatever they require. So what we often see is they ask us to flow monitor that sewer line, put a camera down it, inspect the condition of it, and then from there, if any mitigation measures are required to rehab line, repair that sewer, that'll be incumbent on the developer to make those repairs.
Leave Antonio.
So, not to sound redundant with talking about the MWRA, but just the big picture of, does the MWRA have oversight of the discharge into the sewer and what can be discharged in the sewer? Yes, absolutely, MWRA would have oversight. So the landlord or tenant would have to apply for that permit. The permit application would include information about what's being done at the facility, as well as the anticipated discharge and the treatment plans. All the laboratory discharge has to go through that treatment system that Josh mentioned before it can leave the facility. And then when that permit is applied for, the MWA would provide the prohibition list, things that are not allowed to go down the sink. There are rules about solvent management to make sure that solvents aren't being poured down the sink, and requirements, like you just heard, to prevent any spills or leaks into the sewer system. So any material that is not safe for sink disposal would have to be collected and disposed of by a licensed waste hauler, so it's going to leave the facility safely and be properly treated. The things that could potentially go down the sink would be non-hazardous materials that are miscible with water. So my examples for that would be things like salt buffers, dilute acids and bases if they're in an appropriate pH range, and fully disinfected biological waste. So generally this would be disinfected with bleach, which means that in that final mixture you would have bleach, you would have the salt buffer that any biological materials were growing in, but there would be no live materials being released. They would be completely dead at that time. And then this next slide is just to show you that, yes, that MWA sewer service area, it definitely covers Woburn, as well as all the other towns and cities that were in the other examples, if you were curious about those.
Thank you.
Another question we heard was around the storage processes for gases, liquid hydrogen, and other materials necessary for manufacturing processes. I think Antonia did a great job. She showed an entire list of codes that would be required to be followed. On top of that, for all the storage, there's some additional codes that we would have to follow. NFPA 55 for compressed gases, in addition to the cryogenic fluids as well. OSHA 1910-101 relative to compressed gases, and then 49 CFR 173-301 general requirements around shipment of these gases. So whether it's CO2 or nitrogen, they would be shipped to the facility through in accordance with all of these regulations as established by 49 CFR and Mass DOT, and Federal DOT. The other question that came up was whether or not this building is going to be in complete compliance with air leakage requirements and regulations. This facility will fully comply with the air leakage requirements as established by 2018 International Energy Conservation Code, as directed by the 9th edition of the Massachusetts Building Code. In addition, relative to air leakage, all of the interior spaces and rooms, dependent on their uses, may be positively or negatively pressurized internal to the building. The building would maintain those air leakage requirements, but certain spaces may be negative or positive based on those uses.
What about emergency release? So almost everything you talked about with the OSHA stuff is internal to the employee, because that's what OSHA's
Yep.
about, the employee. We know that. The question I had the last time, which I'm still concerned with, is external release of something into the air. Is there a backup system if there is some need to hit the button and push the air out of the building, where does that air go through? Is it filtered, or we just blow it up into the air and it falls all over the neighborhood?
Yeah, so great question. So depending on the use and what's being done in the facility in a particular area, if it's chemicals that the scientists are working with, they'll be working with those chemicals within a fume hood where that's filtered and exhausted out of the facility. We, again, dependent on the use, we may have HEPA filtered exhausts, and that would be determined based on the permitting for the use of the specific tenant. There's also redundant air systems that would be in place both for exhaust as well as for your makeup air and your air handlers. So there's going to be redundancy. Those systems are also going to be monitored 24/7 through the building automation system. So this building will be fully digital controls, having remote access to be able to visually see. Go ahead, sorry.
The neighbors will never smell anything.
No, I can say nothing from this facility.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. I'm only worried about this facility. I grew up in a world where you could smell everything being manufactured everywhere, wherever you went. We all know how bad that was.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure, to me, if I smell it, there's something there.
Yeah, so I could probably defer to Dr. Michelisi to speak to any kind of details. I can tell you in terms of, kind of when you think of traditional manufacturing with carbon exhaust, you're not going to have that here in this type of facility.
But it still has exhaust, and I just want to be assured that we're not, somewhere down the line, there's what we call in safety, the situation of last resort. There's a situation of last resort. Will there be a capture system to ensure that there is never an expression of something into the air that could be noticed or affect the neighbors?
Correct. So again, depending on what's being exhausted, there would be requirements for HEPA filtration on the exhaust. Okay. I can't speak to the specifics of what that tenant would be.
This is my job.
Yep, absolutely.
You're doing your job. And I just want to be sure because, we're talking about plopping down this big thing in a residential neighborhood. I know what the zoning says, but you can throw a baseball into their backyard. And I just want to be sure that our neighbors are not being exposed to anything.
Yeah, so, we manage, so we have 230 employees. We manage about 10 million square feet of strictly life science and lab space in Greater Boston. I can assure you that, the concerns of smell and discharge, we do not have that at any of these facilities. I definitely get where you're coming from. I'm originally from Maine, so grew up near a paper plant. So I definitely understand the concerns there, that this is not the case in these facilities, extremely clean. And so we've had no concerns relative to smell at any of these properties.
Okay. I'm good.
The other question that came up is relative to 2018 IECC with air leakage requirements if it gets updated. So the proposed development will be built under the most up-to-date codes. So currently we're under the 9th edition of the Massachusetts Building Code, and that would be what we would be building this facility under moving forward. If there is an update, obviously the project would abide by the updated codes at that time. Relative to the airflows, again, in terms of how the air is going to be controlled, as I mentioned, the building automation system is going to be a fully digital system for this facility. We will have redundant exhaust as well as makeup air. Again, as I mentioned, depending on tenant use, there may be pressure differentials within the interior of the building. Again, so you'd have negative pressure rooms versus positive pressure, dependent on that use. These will all be monitored locally, through the system, but also remotely we'll be able to monitor the building. And so if there is a fluctuation out of range, whether it's an air handler or exhaust, could be a terminal unit for temperature, that will alarm. That's a silent alarm that comes to the building technicians for a proper response. But to the point that you made earlier, there is engineered controls for backup in the event of a loss of a piece of equipment. You would have that redundant piece that would step back up.
Okay. So at the City Council Ordinance Committee, we were asked to review zoning ordinances in Waltham, Watertown, Lexington, Cambridge, and Burlington to see if other communities use the term high hazard in their zoning ordinance. And what we've found is that none of those communities, and we'll get looked at other zoning ordinances as well, do not use the term high hazard in their zoning ordinance. The permitting of the chemicals that are used in the process, as Dr. Puglisi indicated, they're all governed by local, state, and federal regulations, local fire department, like local board of health. You know, at the last meeting, and we talked about this and some of your concerns, David, can't lose sight of the cost to make a drug. So if I were the president of XYZ Corporation and I was going to move into this building and I had a contract with the U.S. government to, manufacture a drug to help fight cancer, it's going to cost $2 billion, okay, to produce that drug. So as the owner of that business, I'm going to want to make sure that everything is covered, that we're not going to have any issues with explosions, with things leaking out of the building, all as you have heard from our experts here this evening. Okay, and these are the regulations that regulate the chemicals, et cetera, that go into the manufacturing of the drug or other product that's being produced. I'm going to turn it over to Chris at this time.
Next slide. So a question that we heard was also, how is the community of Woburn going to benefit from the life science space? And in particular, with regards to, we referenced Cambridge multiple times in some of the hearings. And I'm going to make a case in the next few slides that it's not just Cambridge. It's the overall greater Boston area. So if you can go to the next slide. This is taken from a primer that Jones Lang LaSalle actually produced last year, trying to look at the competitiveness of various markets as it related to life sciences, or various cities, I should say. And you can see that, for example, on the upper scale, they ranked 40, I believe it was 49 different major metropolitan areas in the United States with regards to talent, industries, innovation, and real estate score. These are indexed to 100, so 100 is the base. So if you see what does a 145 score mean? It's 45% better than average. That's a way to read this scale. And you can see how the greater Boston area ranked overall, concluding, at least in that study, that it's ranked as the #1 metropolitan area for this type of market. No surprise, the number of life science PhDs that are earned each year in the greater Boston area is also very high. That's fueling the talent for a lot of these facilities. And on the right-hand side, and I think this chart was actually done as of June 2021, you can see the tremendous amount of venture capital funding that's fueling this growth in life science in the greater Boston area. And you can see that over the span of 5 years, it's resulted for the greater Boston area in about 150% growth per year. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Here's an example actually of a facility that opened up about three or 4 weeks ago for Thermo Fisher. They're based out of Waltham, and they open a facility, 300,000 square feet, in Plainville, Massachusetts, resulting in about 300 jobs. If just for comparison, on what we're proposing here, it's roughly 200,000 square feet in 2 buildings. And just to quote the governor there, Massachusetts is fortunate to have an industry-leading company like Thermo Fisher Scientific, headquartered in our state, contributing to our growing life sciences, biotech, and manufacturing sectors and creating high-quality jobs. The point that we're trying to make with these 2 slides is it's not Cambridge, it's not Woburn, it's the entire region that's benefiting from this market. And obviously the close proximity of Woburn to a lot of the major universities, a lot of where the research is actually occurring. You guys are very well positioned for this type of facility. Go to the next slide. This question was asked with regards to the sectional sidewalk that it's currently missing from just east of the hotel site out to Main Street. Certainly, Davis Companies is willing to work with this city to establish any necessary easements to the adjacent parcels and contribute to the sidewalks so that we can close out the missing segment of sidewalk. Is going to require the work with the city again for the easements. We are looking at alternatives, but in either way, we will need the help of the city to be able to accomplish that. So with that, I think that concludes our presentation.
Yes.
Joe, thank you very much to you and your team. I was remiss starting this hearing without putting into the record that both Mike Ventresca and Bob Doherty executed missed meeting certifications for this petition so that they are able to participate and vote.
Okay, great, thank you.
So with that, there were certainly questions during the presentation, but does any member have any questions for the petitioner before I open it up to the public? Mike, go right
Madam
ahead.
Chair. Attorney Tabby, it was mentioned a couple times, I just kind of want to visualize the subsurface parking. You mentioned that a couple times. What does that mean? You're not going to have it, or you're going to have it, it's not going to count towards the overall height?
Yeah, if we have, I don't want to put up one of the buildings there, Chris, if we have parking under a building, okay, not in the ground, but under the building, that will be included within the definition of height.
Is that projected to happen, or at this point you don't know?
All the parking would be at grade.
At grade?
Correct.
Okay. While I have the floor.
Yeah, while you have the floor, go for it.
I have a question for the EH&S person. Yes, thank you. Yes, EH&S, yeah. What, just hypothetically speaking, so a lab, okay, if a lab manufactured wafers, circuit wafers, what type of chemicals would be involved in that? If you could hazard a guess.
You're saying circuit wafers like electronics?
Yes.
I have to admit that is not my area of expertise. I think you'd need solvents still for doing electrical. I could look into it for you.
My point being is,
Yeah.
the reason why I'm asking is, there's, and I brought this up at this previous version of this, so last year, right across the highway, you have Alpha, or Skyworks there now, and they're in a residential area, and, and haven't had any issues with that, as far as, chemicals. 'Cause I have to believe that there's a lot more solvents and probably some cryogenics involved too with that. And that's in a dense area as well. Would a facility like that be allowed in this use? I guess I'm just trying to, thinking out loud.
Good evening. Mike Cantalupa with the Davis Companies. I haven't said a word because there's all these really smart people that have answered all these questions. As part of our research here, we actually went and spoke to the people at Skyworks as to how they manage their facility because it is so close to the residential neighborhood. And through the management with the city of Woburn, health and safety and all that, they actually limit the quantities of solvents and chemicals and anything that's related to circuit boards. So as I think we've described in prior meetings, we've got all of this that we need to go through to get to the building. When the tenant actually comes in, like Skyworks, they have to work with the local community. And if there are greater concerns, in order to actually operate in the building, the amount of quantities of chemicals are further reduced. So
So this
That's
is
about-
step one of a multi-step process.
absolutely,
obviously.
yeah. And that's about the only thing I can contribute at this stage.
Thank you,
Why'd you talk to them?
thank you. I'm good.
All right, are you good? Is there any other board member that has questions before I open it up to the public? Jim, go right ahead.
For Attorney Tobby, does this subdivision proposal, the amendment, overlay, consider the hotel?
Does this proposal include the hotel?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Okay, and we have a height restriction there. Do we know what the height of the existing hotel is currently?
I don't know, Tim, do you have an idea, a guess? No?
I think we're at 3 stories over there, correct? 50 feet, 40-foot limit on the zoning for this proposal with the 35 roof extension for exhaust stacks, correct?
Potentially, yes.
So we're already over that. So in order for that facility to be incorporated in this zoning, they'd have to be modified downward to utilize that area. If they're at 50 feet now, approximately sounds correct, and they're at 40 foot for a maximum height, and 35 feet for the stacks above that, in a limited area, they would
No.
not meet that criteria.
No, they couldn't use the hotel. The hotel would have to be leveled in a new building.
Question, I'm just making sure that's clearly understood.
Yes. Yep.
The water table in the area was a problem back when the Showcase Cinemas developed their property. Has there been any investigation in the area neighborhood, the neighborhoods in the surrounding areas, to document water table elevations prior to construction and modifications of the drainage area?
You know, Tim, can you take that?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have yet to do any kind of geotechnical explorations out there to determine the water table, but I do have record plans from the 1970s when that cinema was built, which we'll be referencing back to once the geotech is brought on board. You're absolutely right. There is a high water table out there, which is kind of part and parcel with the flooding that's going on out there and the lack of the maintenance of the detention basin. So all that will be considered once we finally put pen to paper and start doing the site design.
Just to follow up on that question, their second development, I believe it was, going from the original 4 cinema facility where they added on, is where they did most of their development in the wetlands, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, there was a separate package that I found in our files that expanded the parking lot before they put the addition on the cinema. And then there was a whole nother package that went out when they were actually going to kind of create something similar to Legacy Place, outdoor, additional big box retail with out parcels. So I have several boxes of old record plans of the site development. But to your point, I did find those old geotechnical plans, and you're right, the groundwater is a little suspect out there.
The next one is in regards to traffic. It sounded to me, and I'm looking for clarification, that this traffic evaluation, even though it's preliminary, is only considering the 2-building Davis development and not the hotel and the potential of development in that area. Is that a correct assessment on my understanding of what was discussed tonight?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, Scott Thornton with Vanessa. We haven't prepared a full traffic study yet. What you saw was an estimation of the trip generation for for the proposed facility in comparison with other uses. Now, what we would expect is that the hotel and the cinema would peak at different time periods than the proposed use. We would expect that the proposed use would have its traffic peaking during the morning and the weekday evening time periods, where the hotel and the cinemas would be Friday evening, Saturday evening. So it'd be complementary to the existing uses that are out there.
So the development that we're looking at, we're not looking at two buildings. We're looking at an overlay district here. So it's a whole area, so the buildings are in flux right now. They're probably gonna come down, right? One of them, you have the cinemas which peak at night, we know that, and the traffic in the area is horrendous at best, when they're in the heyday. But the hotel is come and go throughout the day. Just looking to see where your peak periods are gonna be. You have a fire station there that you did address, and you also have a school on the backside, and you're coming right off the rotary, which does back up. You know, if you're from the area, you will know that well.
Yeah, and
I don't know that this slide really gives a good picture of what the actual traffic is currently. Never mind if the hotel and the cinemas were to go away, which is more than likely the overall plan here, from the way I interpret it. But
You know, this,
I'm looking at some of these things that, you know, are being addressed, but not fully vetted out for the general public and the neighbors. Remember, you're taking a development, like's been done in the city from the 60s and 70s. You're putting in commercial properties that have access only through a neighborhood, right? The means and the roadway systems are not always prepared correctly to handle it. But that's, I'll look for further information from you on it. What else?
yeah, so the intent, just to clarify, the intent of these slides is just to show what this use would generate in terms of traffic as compared with other uses that are allowed there by special permit. It's not to document what's currently there on the site or any of that. All that information will be provided at the time that the conventional traffic study gets prepared. And we look at other traffic flow conditions and look at what the site generates now, what it would generate under the proposed development condition.
And then, in addition, that would all be peer reviewed by the city's peer reviewer.
Right.
As well as looked at by Mass DOT.
Understood. So this is a planning board, right? And we are looking at an overlay district which incorporates the hotel and the cinemas, which are both active. So they have to be considered at this point. Not in the future, now, before you go to development. That's my point. The effluent, airborne effluent. It's been 2 meetings now, I haven't really addressed too well, and how it's gonna be transmitted throughout the neighborhoods. What's the flow of it? And, you know, to Mike's point, brought up about, on a sidebar, about the gelatin and odors, and you wonder why you have the exhaust stacks. So let that air transmit it further down the line to someone else, all right? We got neighborhoods, we have a brand new school over there. It has to be considered. Another thing on the effluent, you mentioned 400 Tech Square. If you folks are familiar with East Cambridge now, MIT and all that area, take a look at the stacks down there on the roof. See how many birds are on those roofs that have stacks. You won't find too many whatsoever. There's a reason for that. Again, the effluent only seemed to be addressed for the wastewater and solid matter, and not for air. Thank you.
Is that, okay. Are there any other board member questions or comments before I open it up to the public?
Madam Chair.
Oh,
Just to
go right
follow
ahead.
up, Jim was saying, proposed means just the one building.
Two buildings.
Two buildings. I mean, the 1/3.
One lot, yeah.
One lot. But we're really talking about, I think this is your point, Jim, we're really talking about 3 lots, so in theory, wouldn't that proposed be triple what that is?
I'll let Scott answer that, but, you know, we don't have any knowledge that the hotel is gonna,
No, but you're asking us to give an overlay for that.
right?
All of that, so the assumption we have to make is it's possible that that could actually be 3 times that number, eventually, if it was all built out. If you were only asking for the overlay for just the piece that the 2 buildings are on, that would be an accurate number. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about this overlay is gonna be on 3 separate lots, and so theoretically, that number of almost 200 should be closer to 600.
Well, I'll let Scott comment to that, but again, there would be a peer review that would be done by a peer reviewer for the city of Woburn. And if you felt you wanted the peer review to look at the impact of the development of the whole site, that's what they would do. And in turn, you know, we would potentially have to mitigate whatever that impact could be. I understand your concern.
But you do agree that that number really is 3 times that number if
No.
you... Sure it is, because that's based on 1/3 of the overlay district. That's all that's based on. And you wouldn't be doing the overlay district for the other 2 pieces if there wasn't some expectation that that might happen, that their development might take place. You're certainly not doing the overlay district because the movie theater is gonna stay a movie theater for 1,000 years, or the hotel is gonna stay a hotel. The land is too valuable. What you're proposing putting in there is such a wonderful thing. I can't imagine anybody saying, hey, why not put 2 more in the middle and 2 more on the side, and that number gets tripled. I'm just saying we have to look, as Jim said, we're the planning board. We are planning out, not just, you know, for the minute. We're trying to figure out what is this whole overlay's impact on the community if it becomes maximized to what it could be maximized to. And I think that number underrepresents the real possible long-term number.
But on the flip side, you also have to look at maximizing the site for office park, for shopping center, for medical
Sure, but
office, hospital, medical facility, you know.
I get all that. I'm just saying, I'm just asking that, make sure the numbers truly represent what the potential is for this whole
Yep.
piece of property, these 3 pieces of property.
Okay, got your point.
I'm good.
Are you good? Okay. Are there any other questions or comments from the planning board members? All right, this is a continued public hearing. At this point, I would ask anyone in the audience who wishes to step forward to speak on the project, either for or against, to please come up and state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, good evening. My name's Louise O'Connell. I live at 26 Park Drive.
Welcome.
Thank you. I have been in Woburn for 30 years, and I've experienced flooding, and I'm in that general area. So I live right behind Spence Farm. So my basement does one of these when it floods. It's crazy. But in the area where you're speaking of, it's in my neighborhood, and you're going to say, you're going to go do all this building there, and all the water that's already a problem there is just going to hit Ellen Street, Lowell Street. It's just going to keep moving. So there's got to be a possibility that someone has to look at the water problem, resolve that before continue building. I also live by the new school, and I'm very concerned about, the well-being for the children. We have a lot of senior citizens there as well. It should be a consideration for the safety of everybody. The roads aren't all that great, so that's even a problem. I mean, the traffic that is happening right now, that particular PowerPoint does not do any justice for what it looks like every morning, every evening. It's a horror story. It's kind of like people are jumping off highways, trying to move around the city to get north, adding something like that is only going to be more of a problem. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening. Cynthia Tachi, 16 Lowell Street.
Welcome.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you all. You are taking your responsibility very seriously, and you are very concerned about the welfare of the citizens of Woburn, and you can definitely see that. And I very much appreciate that. I want to say that I have been, you may not know, following this very closely, doing a lot of research on my own. And I talked to a neighbor who works over at Lincoln Labs, and he's telling me that at Lincoln Labs, I guess it's going to be very similar operation to this, and he says the protocols and the levels of security for safety are extremely high, and I'm not concerned, no more than, like you said, a gas station or anything else that it's going to impact our environment. And I think if something did happen, the biggest safety issue would be the lawyers fighting each other, trying to figure out who's going to sue them first. So I am comfortable with this whole operation. I think it's good. I think if we don't do this, now that the cinema has the right to basically do anything there they want to, sell it to anyone they want to, and if it's within the ground, we won't have any control over it, so long as it's within the existing zoning, so we don't know. It could be all kinds of things. There was also the question about traffic, and if the traffic, I know there's definitely going to be an increase in traffic, because you're taking a vacant lot and you're putting a building there. But there's also a lot of concern about the other two buildings, the cinema and the hotel, and if they decide to do that. But frankly, yes, the tech lab traffic will increase, but then you lose the cinema and the hotel traffic. So I don't know if that's a wash or not. That's something for a traffic study to determine. But I have been following it, and I have very, very low levels of concern regarding this project. I think it's overall, financially, I think it'll be good for the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Joe Flaherty, 17 Boyd Road. I've
Welcome.
attended the majority of the public meetings on this development, and I've seen that this proposal has come a long way since inception. Davis has done a good job at soliciting feedback from the community and making changes to incorporate a lot of that feedback. Davis has done a great job of bringing in industry professionals to answer any of the questions and educate on the safeguards that will be put in place during the future build. They've made a lot of effort thus far, and I think that they'll continue to accommodate input of the city to ultimately build a great development that will provide the highest and best use for a currently underutilized site. So I'm in support of this proposal. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hello
Maureen
and
McGann,
welcome.
8 Marion Avenue. I had a question. After looking and doing some research about what other cities and towns have been doing as these life science things have been springing up everywhere, I came across something from the town of Brookline, and it describes a tax certainty structure that they have in place to protect large commercial assets with the potential for tax exemption ownership from later going off the tax rolls. And the developers seek zoning changes, agree to a recorded long-term tax certainty pilot agreement requiring any further tax-exempt owner to make payments based on 100% of the assessed value. Once zoning is in place, these tax agreements cannot be negotiated. But in terms of the labs that could be here, there's wet labs, dry labs. And those labs could be very attractive to nonprofits like hospitals, and we have a few in the area. And if that could take place, and this certainty agreement isn't there, once it flips to a nonprofit, that taxes revenue is gone for the city, and it goes back to the citizens. Excuse me. So that was one thing. I don't know if the city has something like that, if they consider something like that. I've been to a couple of the meetings here. I've never heard anything about it discussed, but I certainly think in terms of revenue production for the city, it's something that really needs to get looked into. And the other thing regarding safety, I've seen some information that suggests that these life science buildings and are now becoming targets for cyber attacks. And I think that brings up another safety issue. We've been told that the tenants of these buildings are not yet known, and that should maybe be something that should be considered, that they should have the highest level of protection for these things, because, you know, there's a possibility that dangerous things could be released if, you know, these sort of cyber attacks could happen. So I have something here regarding the tax certainty structure from the town of Brookline. I don't know if you'd want it to look at later.
We could have a motion to accept in the
Motion
public
to
record.
accept.
Motion to accept by Dave. Is there a second? Second by Kevin. All in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you. We'll take that into the public record.
Sure, thank you very much.
Is there a question formulated in there?
I'm sorry?
Is there a question in there formulated? You had the question, is it? It was hard for me to understand what the exact question was.
Oh, the question was,
Is it in there?
the
No, I
question
think your
was,
que-
does the city have that tax certainty structure?
Okay, okay.
And that requires the developers to, you know, kind of guarantee that in case so it doesn't shift into a nonprofit and you lose the tax revenue.
Ah,
Yeah, that was the initial question. I don't know if they do or they don't, but
oh,
I
very
thought it
good.
was an interesting thing to know about.
Well, we can find out.
Okay.
Thank you very much. All right, is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak tonight? Please come up and state your name and address for the record. Yep.
Marie Lean, 6 Marion Ave.
Welcome.
Thank you. The initial presentation was for an overlay that would probably create 2 biomedical or life science buildings. Now there are 5 parcels. This is a much bigger overlay, which would allow for more buildings. The water table is a real concern. The wetlands, all the way out to Lowell Street, that's a real concern also. Probably my biggest concern is in reading the handout from Davis Company, and I do congratulate them for their huge effort to do the best possible job they can, answering questions, accommodating people's requests. They're a class act, and I give them credit for that. But my concern remains that this is a residential area. I know they showed us other residential areas, but I'm concerned about Woburn, not Waltham, not Watertown, Woburn. And the fact that there's a school, a nursery school, the fact that there'll be discharge off the roof, that I don't know that we can totally control that. But most of all, on their own chart, they talk about level 1 and level 2, which is, they've dropped 3 and 4. when we started this process, it was shocking to think that they would propose level 3 and 4, because level 4 involves something as dangerous as Ebola research. So I'm glad that because of the public interest, they've dropped level 3 and 4, and we're down to level 1 and 2. Now, level 1 and 2, on their own chart, the risk factor, the community risk is low, the worker risk is low in level 1. Level 2, community risk low, worker risk moderate. I really feel the taxpayers that live in that half-mile circle deserve to live with no risk, because no amount of tax money that would come from this project can make up for the fact that people's quality of life will change. And anyone who says it won't change is not being realistic. Initially, it was touted that there would be 500 jobs. Now it's down to 200. Those 200 people are going to be arriving to work in the morning when the school buses are coming. I mean, you know the whole scenario. That ramp off 128 has been backed up at 1 in the afternoon. No accident, just 1 in the afternoon traffic. So those are all the reasons why I'm still concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else in the audience today that would like to speak? All right, I don't see, do I see a hand raised? Okay, so at this point, if there are questions that the board has based on audience questions, feel free. Attorney Tarby, if there are no questions from the board, I'd certainly welcome your remarks, and then we can decide how to proceed.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to a couple of things here. This property is not a residential district. It's a business interstate district. And if you look at section 6.0, the table of dimensional regulations, this district allows buildings that are 80 feet, 7 stories tall. Okay, there's a lot of land there. There's the potential for a lot of development there. Someone made a point about a nonprofit. Well, a nonprofit medical facility could be located there. I just want to make sure that everyone understands that we're looking to overlay at a 40-foot limit a district that allows 80 feet in height, 7 stories. As far as I know, because I've been involved in this project since from day one, you know, we always propose 2 buildings. We never propose 5. In addition, I'm not aware that we ever suggested that PL4 would be used on this site. And any of the traffic-related concerns, and I acknowledge those concerns. I live in Woburn, and I know the traffic. As I've said earlier, all of those will be looked at through the peer review process. And as far as tax relief is concerned, you know, I can almost guarantee, knowing Mayor Galvin, because I've sat at the table with him over the years looking for tax relief on some projects, he's never going to give up a penny. He's got his eye on the best interests of the city of Woburn in terms of fiscal responsibility. That's never going to happen. So you shouldn't be concerned about that. So just wanted to respond to those two things that speakers that had made those comments.
So Joe, I just have a question. I had not yet ever heard of a tax certainty sort of structural agreement, but I can sort of conceptualize the potential problem, I think, and let me set it forth, and perhaps you have some thoughts on it. I think the potential problem is that the building is developed by a for-profit entity, and for-profit tenants come in for some period of time, and then the building is sold to a university, for example. And then that new buyer says, hey, I'm tax exempt. And my understanding of the comment was there could be some sort of agreement whereby the property is bound to be taxable in perpetuity despite who owns it. So I'm just mulling that over and asking if that's the concern, right? That currently the developer is a taxable entity, that the who owns the property is a taxable entity up until a point when all of a sudden someone buys it who is not a taxable entity. Can you comment on that scenario?
Well, maybe, Michael, do you want to comment on that? I will say this, that in the past with Mayor Galvin, I know in the case of the Vale, where MGB had received a special permit to build their medical facilities, they were nonprofit, exempt from taxes, but the mayor negotiated, my understanding is the mayor negotiated an agreement with them where they would pay annual taxes to the city of Woburn. I can't comment on Davis's intentions here, and I'll rather have Michael do that.
I don't have a ton of experience in this. I've run into this a couple times. What I can say is really two things. I don't think this site is different than any other site in the city in that regard. Any other site in the city could be sold to a nonprofit and you'd be in the same position. So, you know, I'm not sure why this site gets singled out for that particular purpose. I have been involved in transactions where a nonprofit, sometimes it's an educational institution, and what more often than not happens there is there's a discussion with the city. They may be tax exempt, but there's typically a negotiated payment in lieu of taxes that would substitute for the normal tax assessment process. It is not our intention to lease this to a nonprofit. To be honest with you, we would like to maximize our profits after going through the process here, and that is not the type of tenant that we're targeting. I can't guarantee who will show up, but that is what my experience has been in the past, and so it is not a foregone conclusion that somebody would come in and just wipe this off the tax rolls. I think there would be a lot of discussion about who that entity is, and lots of opportunity, as Joe said, for the mayor and all of you, to the extent you're involved in that kind of process, to make sure that doesn't happen.
So I just have one follow-on question. So I certainly, have no reason not to take you at your word that, you want to keep it and that the people you would lease it to sort of won't create any sort of tax structure situation, to your knowledge. But say, for example, in 5 years, your company says, boy, we've got this great offer and we're going to sell it, right? You can sell it. It's your property. Nobody in the city of Woburn is going to say, oh, you can't sell your property. That's not private property, right? That's not how it works. So you sell it. And then at that point, somebody owns this property who is tax exempt. I think that's what the concern raised is. Do you see where I'm going with that? That at that point, there's what's to negotiate. Somebody comes into the city, they have bought a piece of property, they say, I am tax exempt, I'm not paying.
Yep, like Michael said, that could apply to any building across the city.
Indeed, and I think the
This
reason
one's
that that's
being
coming
singled out.
up, the reason that it's coming up in this LBOD discussion is the last set of slides, for example, that your team put together, which is, look at the, great benefit that the city of Woburn can get from, economically from a development such as this. So, do it. And I think the comment was, well, okay, that's well and fine, but are we really going to be always assured to get that economic benefit? So that's an interesting point I had never considered. All right, with regard to that, any follow-on questions or any other questions from the board?
Can I just want to, Joe, just a question. The courthouse up the street is leased, so technically the courthouse is a nonprofit, right? I mean, it's a tax-free thing, but the property is leased to the county, so they pay taxes, right?
I'm not sure of that. My understanding, my involvement with Winchester Hospital is that if Winchester Hospital went out and bought a medical office building and then leased it to 20 doctors and they were collecting rent on it, they would have to pay taxes on it versus forming a nonprofit organization to run it. So I'm not sure in that particular case, Cummings owns the property, leases it to the state.
So it's a taxable
So
property.
I'm guessing it's a taxable.
So, I mean, I'm just trying to play with the
I don't know.
idea that we just had thrown out here. But, okay, thanks, I'm good.
Okay.
Great, thank you. All right, Bob.
Yeah, just a few thoughts. I'm torn between a lot of this. I'm not a big fan of setting up new districts and new zoning areas, even though we do it on a regular basis. Some of them have worked out well, some of them not that well. Great presentation, by the way, just one of the better ones I've ever seen in front of us. They covered all the bases. What I've learned from this is that this particular project, and this happens to us all the time, this particular project is better than what else can go there. And it's almost like it's thrown at us that, you know, hey, this is better than a shopping center. So I know that now. I know that it's better than, you know, an office, a medical office, discount stores and things like that. Traffic-wise, that area has become an awful area in traffic. It's becoming East Woburn, parts of North Woburn. You come off of 128. First of all, we've got one of the most dangerous rotary off-ramps in the state right there. You come off of that to head to Woburn Center, and it's backed up from that spot all the way to the light at Wyman Street. And you gotta wait. So again, no matter what we do, traffic's gonna be worse. I don't need a traffic study to tell me this. I don't need, you know, anything like that. It is going to be worse than it is now, and it is bad now. But it doesn't seem like we really can do anything about that because anybody can put anything else in there. I'm not comfortable with the distance from the houses or from the zoning. It went from 125 to 215. I think what we're looking for is 1,500, but 125 to 215 doesn't do it for me. But again, I've learned that we're better than Waltham, we're better than Watertown, we're better than Lexington, we're better than Cambridge. We could be all of them. And again, I said these are just thoughts, so they're all somewhat random. I'm a little disappointed in the public participation, because I know if this was going 300 feet away from my house, I would be here. And I really wanted to hear from the public and the neighbors as to how they felt. Because as one woman got up there and said, we really do think about the neighbors and the people and the people in the city of Woburn, and we consider that, and I don't really have a lot to consider. We had a couple for and a couple against. So if this doesn't go any further, if this goes further and we have another public hearing, I would hope that more people would show up. Just because, I don't know about the rest of it, but I want to hear from them. I want to hear from the people that live on all those streets over there. You know, the concerns about the air, all that. The other concern I have is and flooding, which that's a major concern throughout the whole city. Every time any project goes, doesn't matter where it is in the city, the residents come up and tell us they're worried about flooding, because it's a citywide problem. It isn't a particular area problem. This area happens to be worse than most areas. And I just can't imagine that once that cement starts getting dug up and the bulldozers are in there and the buildings are going up, that the people that live off of those streets over there, you know, even a place like Park Street or some Park Drive, you know, Hart Street, are those places going to get worse than they are now? So I'm concerned about that also. So those are just my concerns, my thoughts. I don't know. Like I said, I'm torn between this. The one thing I'm not really that worried about is the safety controls. There's plenty of safety controls. You know, they're there. you don't suspect anything's gonna happen, but, you know, I'm sure Chernobyl had safety controls too, but that's not a real big concern with me. But, as I said, I'm torn between the whole thing, so. Just some random thoughts.
Excellent. Bob, thank you for sharing. All right, any other
Thank you for listening.
comments, questions, concerns? Mike?
To continue some random thoughts here, I think this is an opportunity where we can address problems that are already there. I mean, that rotary is a disaster. Like the woman said, at 1 o'clock in the day. This is, I believe, an opportunity where we can address that area as far as not only the traffic, but the water situation. I know we've done plenty of, Rose Farm and that. I'd like to believe that, that was a huge concern, was the water. And I believe that on Colonial Drive, they had a big issue with the water. And I believe that whatever was designed there worked for that area. So I gotta believe that the water situation will be looked at and addressed. I mean, right now, you got nothing but asphalt there, and something goes in there that's gonna be built to these standards nowadays. It's gonna have to maintain all that runoff on site, so that's how I'm looking at it. I think the presentation, very rarely do we get an overlay to this detail, what is envisioned there. So, guys, definitely did your due diligence, and I praise you for that. And they've tried to pick off everybody's concerns. And as far as the distance for the high hazard use, I think a problem is the term high hazard use, and that's just a term that's thrown out there, but they've kind of quantified it with what's going to go in there. Again, I'm just looking at this. There's definitely concerns, but I think all these concerns could be addressed as we progress. This is step one of a multi-step plan. Site plan and all that stuff, and traffic studies are going to be done. Like I say, there's going to be traffic, I mean, regardless. But maybe it's an opportunity where we could, improve things considering what's going to go in there. It's my random thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if people are done sharing, what I'd like to do is ask Tina if she has a recommendation for how we might proceed tonight.
So I had originally, maybe about a week ago, held out some hope that we might be able to get to some sort of a decision this evening on a recommendation. And I'm thinking that's not the case, as it turns out, and that you might want to continue the hearing for another 2 weeks. And the reason for that is, not only do some of you probably want to think a little bit more about what we heard tonight, but you recall when we looked at the overlay district last year, that regardless of what the planning board's recommendation was, we provided to the city council sort of a detailed list of issues that we saw with the text of the proposed amendment, and suggested the council consider making some changes if in fact they adopted it. Obviously, that didn't happen. I've certainly looked through the proposal contemporarily. Some of those issues that the board raised last year have been summarily addressed, and addressed, I think, the way the board would want. But there are a couple of the suggestions that you made last time that were not heeded with this draft. And when I looked at it the last week, and particularly the last 2 days, there's a couple of questions and issues that I'd like to vet with, depending on which one we're talking about, either Attorney Tarby or perhaps even Tom Quinn, the building inspector. So what I'm thinking is recommending to you that you continue the hearing for another 2 weeks. Allow me some time to work with the petitioner's attorney, the city solicitor, and come up with, in advance of that meeting, a list of issues specific to the text of the zoning amendment that you might want to consider, whether you end up recommending the council rezone or not. I think we'd handle it the same way the last time, which is to suggest some specific amendments to the text for them to consider.
All right, thank you for the recommendation. Does anybody have thoughts based on what they just heard?
So moved.
Sounds good.
So that would be a motion to continue for 2 weeks to allow the planning board director to conference the matter with the various people she mentioned, and for us to think about whether, as a planning board, how do we feel about an LBOD in this area?
Yes,
That's the motion?
that is the motion.
Beautiful. Is there a second?
Second for discussion.
All right, and
And the
Discussion.
discussion is, do you think if we did this virtually, we'd get more community involvement?
well, that's an interesting question. I mean, we had,
Because we thought we'd get it more by having it here, and we didn't. We got a nice chunk, but I agree with Bob that I thought they'd be out in the hallway.
I actually walked around, I printed out a bunch of flyers to invite people to come, and I've talked to people, but it was probably like 20 houses I hit. I don't know how I can go around, I mean, I can do a better job.
I guess that would be my only comment, would be, do we do it live or Memorex?
Do we have that, we still have that option?
You do.
We do.
We haven't yet discussed how we'll hold that meeting.
Jim, you had something to say?
I have a concern, similar to David and Bob's, that the lack of public participation. I know there was a neighborhood meeting. I was contacted after our initial meeting, and I think that's kind of what spurred on the immediate neighborhood meeting. But more than just the Ellen Road development is affected by this. I honestly believe that there should be a larger presence by probably councilors in this area that represent the general public and get some feedback from the area that's immediately impacted. And if people have concerns, to come down here, and we're just representing their interests. If they feel that the development of this property with a LBOD overlay is the best use of it in comparison, like Attorney Tobby mentioned, an 8-story building, office building, and you vet out the issues, mainly being traffic and those considerations versus, the health of the area. I mean, the residents get to speak their mind. We represent them. And to see, less than 10 people down here from the greater neighborhood that's being affected by it, it's kind of disappointing. I still think we should have an in-person meeting so they could be present. The onus is not on the developer to generate these meetings either. They only have to reach out to the 300 feet from the corners of the property. That's the limitations. So the general public is going to pay attention to what's going on around them, and the neighbors have to get involved. If they want to speak up, now's the time to do it. And I welcome that. That's it.
Yep, go
To
ahead.
my point, I mean, we're recommending to the city council, it's not like it's our decision, so there's a couple of bites at the apple here. Obviously, it'd be great if we got more participation. I'm glad these people showed up. It shows, I mean, I lived on Lowell Street for a number of years. So it obviously be better to see, to get more people involved, but, what more can we do? I mean,
Well, and I guess I'd kind of add, if you wouldn't mind adding there, I'm thinking along the lines that you are, Mike. Not to excuse, it would be great to have more people here, but many of them have attended multiple neighborhood meetings, and they've been going to the city council meetings, and it may be, not to any disparagement of the planning board, but they may need to limit. They only have so much of their personal time that they can put toward this. They may be focusing it at the city council, which is the board that actually makes the decision. So, to your point, that's just a thought.
So, Madam Chair, could I just clarify the notice that was given with these hearings? Okay, so, first of all, we've had 3 neighborhood meetings, okay? Councilor Demers had his own meeting at the library, And then the abutters list includes everyone within 300 feet from all of the property, and that includes National Amusements 12-acre wetlands that goes all the way out to Lowell Street. So it fronts along Lowell Street. So everyone within 300 feet from that lot line in the Lowell Street area, 300 feet from the lot line at Ellen Road, and then 300 feet behind the hotel, and then they also own Middlesex Canal Park, the drive, everyone from 300 feet there. So there were hundreds of abutters. There were, I think, 5 abutters lists that were used in connection with this hearing. So everyone has got notified. And we've spent a lot of time trying to work with the neighbors at the neighborhood meetings, talking to neighbors individually, meeting with city councilors, and meeting with Councilor Demers. So, you know, I don't want anyone to have the impression that, you know, we're trying to slam this through, because we're not. We started this process last year. We heard the concerns. We moved the buildings to the other side of the lot to increase the buffer, and we've gone on to have meetings, and we've addressed every concern. If there's other things that we can address, you know, tonight, although I know you took the motion, we'd be happy to do it, because I think the recommendation in 2021, as I said, I think, Tina, you were out of the room when I was going over that, there were 5 comments, and we addressed all of them. 2 of them, we had proposed 15% coverage. 15% of the top of the building could be used. The T-Bod provides for 3%, and we proposed 7% as a compromise. And then the only other thing we hadn't addressed was a 15-foot setback. Everything else we addressed, we added the definitions, we addressed the redundancy, we addressed the height with the parking under the building. So with the exception of those 2 things, those are the only things that we haven't addressed. And I don't know if you'd like us to address them this evening.
Well, Joe, I appreciate the point, and I don't believe that the board feels that you or the petitioner are, you know, doing anything less than above board on the notification. But my memory of how it ended up last year is that the recommendation that we gave to the city council was not in favor of the LBOD. And I believe, if I'm correct, that the line items that we're referring to were sort of designed to, if the city council was to be in favor of it, the things that we would see changed. And the reason I remember it is because I think I was one of the only votes in favor the last time. And the reason that's relevant is that what you're seeing, at least what I'm seeing, is the planning board, each individual member struggling with the plan for this set of lots. Is this the appropriate plan for this set of lots, this LBOD, this life sciences use? A year ago, the answer to that largely was no, they didn't think it was appropriate. And I think I'm sensing the struggle between the competing policy interests at work. Is this the appropriate place for this thing? If it is, then what are the details around that being appropriate? And so I'm getting the sense from the planning board director and the board that, you know, there's still the struggle, that there is not a going forward decision. You know, any board member can jump in and tell me whether that is a correct assessment of the mood or not, but that's what I'm feeling.
And that's how I remember it as well. But I also remember, I think you asked the question, the planner, was why haven't we seen a petition like this before? And I think Tom Quinn provided information on this, and what's happened is we have these facilities all over the city, okay, and the reason they don't qualify for high hazard use, and they're right next to residents, is because they stay under the limits, okay, that kick in high hazard use. So instead of having one delivery every 3 weeks. They have 6 deliveries every 3 weeks so that they stay under the limit. So this is not new to the city of Woburn, what we're proposing to do. And this, the Davis companies, they don't come any better than the Davis companies in this area, so. Because we're a little disappointed we couldn't move from here tonight, that's all.
Claudia?
Go ahead.
Joe, I am no way saying that you're trying to ram it down our throats here. I think I was pretty specific in the fact that I wanted to hear what the public thought. And you're right, we probably could have voted on it tonight. We probably could have. As a matter of fact, there's a part of me, because there really isn't anybody here, against it, to have just pushed it forward. Said, okay. But, you know, and I know you've had a lot of meetings, but it's not like anybody is communicating to us what has happened in those meetings. The alderman's not here. I don't know if the alderman has spoken to anybody specifically. So I don't know, in those meetings, everybody could be against it. And I'm gonna sit up here and vote for it, and when everybody in the city is against it. And I don't wanna do that. So that's why I'm willing to go the extra 2 weeks, just to see if I can get some more feedback for it. Because when everybody's, when the general public, when the neighborhood is against something, it makes us think twice about it. But that's it. I'm no way am I thinking you jamming it down our throats whatsoever. You know, I don't think it's a bad use for the place itself. But again, I don't know what the people think. Right now, I think they don't care, that whatever wants to go in, put it in. So.
Yeah, but what, you know, I've been through this many times, and so what happens from this point on is, you know, if you're here tonight and you're against this, then it's like a political campaign. You're gonna go out and you're gonna get 20 people to come down here. You're gonna get 20 people to come down here. You know, that may not even be from the area, and, you know, we could have 100 people here at the next meeting. Is that really, you know, a real good view of how people feel?
Well, no, but you would do the same thing. You would get 20 people to come down here in favor of it.
We haven't.
No, you didn't. But you would. If you knew that there was a lot of people coming down here against it, you would also get a bunch of people to come down here for it. So you'd be doing the same thing that they're doing. But I don't anticipate that happening. I don't anticipate it happening, but anyways, it's just, there's a motion on the floor, and the board can vote against that motion and take a regular vote if everybody feels that way.
Indeed, if my assessment of the mood is wrong, then I will shortly be proved right or wrong, won't I? All right, is there any other discussion on the motion which has been made and seconded to put this matter on our agenda for September 27th at 7 o'clock? Hearing none, I will ask for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in favor, none opposed. We will take this matter up again in 2 weeks at 7 o'clock. And we will decide whether it will be a virtual or whether it will be an in-person meeting. We can have that discussion now, or we can have it at the end of the meeting, whatever the board prefers.
I would like to have it in person.
And Jim had said in person. Carolyn had said in person. All right. So we will.
Remote. No.
What? All right, so that will be here in this room at 7 PM on the 27th. Thank you very much.
Can I have 5 minutes?
Sure, we're going to take a 5-minute recess and then take up the last matter on the agenda.
If it's a no.
Back, convened at our Tuesday, September 13th, 2022 Planning Board meeting at 9:17. Under subdivisions, shall we just quickly do two postponements? I can call 3 Sherman Terrace, expiration of construction completion date. Apparently, there is an unavailability of the developer and the representative attorney. My understanding is that Tina is recommending we continue it to September 27th at 7 PM.
So moved.
Motion by Bob, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dave, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed, that matter stands continued to September 27th, 2022 at 7 PM. Crossman Road, expiration of construction completion date, review of bond amount. My understanding, again, is that the developer and representative attorney are unavailable, and that the recommendation is to postpone this matter to September 27th, 2022 at 7 PM. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bob, second by Dave. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. All right, under subdivisions, Highview Estates, impending expiration of construction completion date, update on litigation progress, Santulo Construction. Attorney Jane, welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Santulo, welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Planning Board members. Rashawn Jan for Senko Builders. So I'm happy to give an update. We have made significant progress with Eversource. We have an agreement with Eversource regarding their conditions for the initial test blasting work. And that includes employing a third-party qualified monitor to monitor the blasting. Mr. Santulo is in touch with that monitor now. We are working on employing him. And so we can also give you an update in terms of the timeline. We did provide a spreadsheet with updated dates earlier today. And I know there were some questions last time because we had a typographical error in our spreadsheet, which showed a gap of 1 year. But to summarize, we expect that the blasting work will most likely commence in the spring of this year, that the utility installation will be completed by July of 2024, home construction completed by July of 2025. I'm sorry. By July of 2025. Final roadway construction completed by October 2025. As-built plan submitted by November 2025, and hopefully acceptance of the plan and legal street description by December of 2025. I hope if you have any questions on either of those two issues, I'm happy to answer them now.
All right, now, sure, Jim, go right ahead.
I do. It sounds just a little aggressive for what you're doing. I thought last time we talked, you were somewhere in the range of a three-year development.
Yeah, I would say.
And my concern is that whatever we put forward here, after all this effort, I want it to be most accurate, particularly for the blasting component of it, all right? And then something as sensitive as this with the high-tension power lines and the neighborhood's concerns, we want to be right up front, and if it's greater than the 2-year that permitted that we usually give out, that doesn't bother me whatsoever. I'd just rather it be accurate. We don't keep coming to the table again. But that's my concern.
Certainly, well, perhaps Mr. Santulo can give a little bit more insight on that, because, I mean, of course, it is possible that this could take somewhat longer.
I would say that you're accurate. I would say that, from the moment, basically from the moment we get an extension of 2 years where I can actively, retain my site work guy again and a blaster, and now, of course, all the pre-blast surveys have to be redone, Everything has to be done over again. So that's why we said at best, we're looking at doing all that through the winter, the fall and the winter, and stop blasting in the spring, and then it's gonna be a whole year. It's gonna be a whole year of prepping the site for road and houses before you even do infrastructure on the road. And that's in a perfect world, right? It's in a perfect world, you know? So to sit here and say, could it take more than am I gonna be back here for another extension in 2 years? Yes, absolutely.
That's kind of the concern that I have. I'd rather know that it'd be a 4-year development than 2 sets of 2. Because what we convey out to the general public from these meetings, the more accurate that we come out of the gate, the better for everyone involved. What happens is that the neighbors get frustrated with a project that goes longer than they initially expect. And we all know they're gonna take more than 2 years, right? Because they're more complicated for whatever the reason. But the more accurate we give her a timetable up front, the better for everyone involved. You don't have to keep coming to the table and have that argument or fight and just get it out there. I mean, I'm all right now in favor of giving you at least a 36-month completion timeline. And I think that may even be a little bit tight, but that's me, and I feel like I get a background in it that lends a little bit to the credibility.
I think a 3-year timeline is doable. I just think, for me to sit here and tell you it's definitely gonna happen all in 3 years, I can't do that, you know?
No, I understand.
Tina?
I noticed a discrepancy. I'm not sure if it affects your final answer. In your letter, Attorney Jan, you indicated that home construction would be completed by July of 2024.
Right, yeah, there are some typos in that first paragraph of the letter, but I would just refer you back to the spreadsheet, which I think,
Well, the spreadsheet, in fact, indicates that home construction will be completed in August of 2025. So the letter, July 2024, the spreadsheet, August 2025.
right, the 2025 home construction date is
Okay.
the more realistic date. But, with regard to Member Callahan's comments, we acknowledge this could take somewhat longer.
Thank you. That was
All right. Are there any other questions?
I just have a curiosity question. How many units are we talking here?
10.
10, okay. I see what you're saying.
So, there's a bunch of communications here, Tina. Do you want to summarize them for the board, and so that they can figure out, which of these communications need to be addressed today?
There was one general theme in a series of sort of related emails from different parties. In mid-July, the counselor for the ward contacted staff and said that there were a couple of aspects of the stormwater pollution prevention plan which were not being observed. The board might remember that Mr. Santullo submitted a abbreviated SWIP, Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. I'll just call it SWIP from now on. And it was accompanied by a plan. And actually, many of you, or all of your recent extensions of the completion date have been granted, subject to a couple of conditions. One of them is continued compliance with the terms of the SWIP. And mid-July, the counselor contacted staff and indicated that at least in a couple of ways, it appeared that the developer was not complying with the SWIP. And so there is a series of emails that go back and forth. As it turned out, I can't say that I reviewed all of the SWIP provisions and tried to figure out whether or not Mr. Santullo complied with them all. But there were a couple that stand out. One is the requirement for fencing around the site and to maintain it in good condition. And another was to put erosion control measures around a number of the catch basins. And that work was done. But in the intervening couple of years, it appears that there's portions of that perimeter fencing that have fallen down and have not been repaired. There was some buildup of sand and silt and leaves and debris on the catch basins that indicated that in fact there was not regular maintenance. Nobody was going down to remove that stuff from the catch basin cover, which had silt sacks in it. And as a result of that lack of maintenance, there was, according to the counselor, street flooding that was happening because the water literally couldn't get into the catch basin for the amount of debris on top. So staff contacted Mr. Santullo and his attorney in July to share those allegations, if you will, and emails. Mr. Santullo wrote back, and we eventually picked up the string this week. It turned out that he had not been visiting the site because he doesn't consider it to be an active subdivision. He's not working in it, so he has not been doing sort of regular routine reviews and maintenance. He did try to respond, and he went down when he heard that there was issues, that the catch basin was covered. He went down and took the debris out and took the silt sack out so that everything could then flow freely into the catch basin, and that's not at all what should have happened in that regard. There is a question, and I think there's a belief on Mr. Santullo's part, that a lot of that debris was sand from DPW trucks in the winter. But I called engineering today, and they confirmed for me that we don't use sand. We actually use virtually all salt in our application in Woburn. So I don't believe that the majority of that issue was in fact city-related, but regardless of how it happened, it wasn't being maintained on a regular basis, and it caused some issues. So there is a concern, or at least in the email exchange, you begin to see a concern that there was a condition of the board's previous votes to extend the completion date, and there was at least one condition that does not appear to have been met or consistently met, and that is the SWIP plan conformance. So I think that summarizes what most of these emails are, and they're here tonight, hopefully trying to resolve that. But it remains a significant concern. I guess, DPW, or, excuse me, I can't speak for them, but engineering, I chatted with them today. In our lingo, that's an active subdivision site. You were in there, there's stuff, there's been stabilization that's occurred by nature. Some of the piles of material that had been stockpiled now have growth on them, but that doesn't mean that they're not causing issues somewhere in the neighborhood, and it doesn't take away from the fact that you have to conform to the SWIP, and the city does consider that an active site, whether you're actively working on it or not.
So I'm happy to address some of those concerns. First, Mr. Santullo has reinstalled the silt sacks. They're there, they're clean. I think the photographs that we provided to the board demonstrate that. He understands that those silt sacks need to be cleaned and maintained. He's going to do that going forward. I do think it is important to take into consideration how much the conditions at the site have changed. The initial and small amount of construction that was done in 2016 stopped then. And the site has become substantially overgrown. I think some of the photographs that we presented demonstrate that. So the propensity for there to be, runoff, et cetera, from that property are substantially reduced. That said, Mr. Santullo certainly understands the need to have the silt sacks and catch basins, cleaned and maintained. He's going to do that going forward. He did reach out to Sullivan Engineering over the last few days. Jack Sullivan visited the site today. He did provide an email, which I have copies of it for the board if you'd like to see it, with regard to his opinions in terms of the fact that, I think he would probably agree that, perhaps the silt sacks in the catch basins obviously still need to be maintained, cleaned, et cetera, but that in terms of other active measures on the property, that he doesn't see that that's important to do. I'm happy to circulate this to the board now if
Sure, we're happy
like.
to accept that into the record. Is there a motion?
Yes, there is.
Motion by Bob, second by Dave. All in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you.
Would you like me to provide a copy for each board member? I do. I do. No, I No, I have plenty. Thanks.
I'll just add to that, if you don't mind. Back when that condition was put in the approval when obviously we had this problem with Eversource, and it required these small extensions and then updates, on the court case, we did start construction on a very small portion of the lot, and all the erosion controls with the SWIP plant were installed, they were maintained, and even, after we had a cease and desist order and we stopped, I maintained them because the site was unstable. Right? It was unstable because we disturbed it, so it was unstable. Never in a million years did I think we'd be here 6 years later. This is 6 years, okay? So here we are 6 years, and like he said, the site has significantly changed. So what I meant to the board, was that there was no need for silt fence. I'm gonna do more damage going in there, putting silt fence and hay bales in there now in a site that we're not working at, because all of the ground cover is back, trees and brush are back. The site itself is stable. I have to make it unstable in order to put erosion controls in at this point. And there really is no point until we start construction. And I fully intend on installing all erosion control measures and have them inspected by your boards, whoever wants to see it, before I continue construction. I mean, that goes without saying. Obviously, all these measures need to be taken before real construction starts back at the site. As far as the silt set goes, like I said, it's been 6 years of stuff flowing in there. I don't believe it's from the site, or all of it's off the site, but neither here nor there. They were full, they shouldn't have been full. I cleaned them, I removed the silt sacks, put brand new ones in, and there's brand new silt sacks in the 2 catch basins on Highview right now.
And that's appreciated. So clearly, from your point of view, when the site is not being actively worked, you're off doing other things. And,
Yeah.
I get that.
And
But
stable,
but
and stable. I mean, the site as it sits today is stable.
Well, I mean, if we get complaints, from a city councilor and things of this nature, we have to assume that there's some condition out there that was causing concern. People usually don't complain about nothing, although that's possible too. But at this point, having gone to mass courts and pulled the status of the litigation, I do see that in your court case against Eversource, there is a status date in December. And I understand that main details of this blasting have been resolved. But I also understand that, the devil is in the details sometimes. And if everything was resolved and you had a firm date, you'd be coming here with a firm date for blasting, and you'd be telling the court, hey, we're all done here, we don't need you anymore. But that's not the case. I'm just wondering whether it makes sense to extend your subdivision, for a short period of time in the hopes that you can get a firm agreement as to the blast start date, which I don't see emerging from the paperwork in your court case right now. Because I think Jim's point is well taken, that we would like to be able to give you the time you need, not more, not less, but we don't know when that starts. As you said, here we are 6 years later, and nobody, well, actually, that's not surprising for Middlesex Superior Court to me, but I understand for normal people, that would be a situation. I'm just wondering whether it makes sense to give a short period of time in the hopes that you work out the details regarding blasting work remain to be resolved as the project progresses. At some point, they're going to sign off on your first blast, right?
That's correct, but the dynamics of this are largely outside of the court's purview in a sense right now, in that, right now Mr. Centullo is working on retaining the qualified third-party monitor, and he has to do the neighborhood surveys,
Pre-blast.
the pre-blast surveys with the neighborhood, and then coordinate with main drilling to fix a date. And we have agreed on the terms of the blasting with Eversource, but there are sort of some things outside of our dynamics with Eversource and the courts that also bear on when we will have a firm date to commence the blasting. So I mean, we can.
And is your timeframe, getting all that in place by December, or is that I'm just trying to figure out, in case this goes for another 6 years, do you see my point? Like, we didn't
Yeah.
ever thought we'd be here in 2022 having this discussion with nothing done on the site, but yet here we are. And I'm just trying to, listen to what I'm hearing, some of which is, we don't mind giving you the time you need, but we really want to know that it's right. And I'm just not feeling super confident that, you've got to deal with Eversource that's going to withstand the details, because they're Eversource.
Well, we have gone back and forth with Eversource on the details. I mean, down to the, nitty gritty of them reviewing the test blast plan and saying, what is the maximum charge per hole, et cetera, and us giving them clarification in terms of what that is. Them giving us their specific insurance requirements, the requirement to have a third-party monitor. I mean, all these details have been worked through. So we have an agreement in that sense. We just don't have an actual permit from them yet because we haven't completed coordinating the third-party monitor with the blasting company, et cetera.
Okay.
But I mean, that said, I understand your concern in terms of timing. I mean, we can provide another status update in December or early January, perhaps, given the holidays, in terms of where we are in that process. I'm happy to do that.
Well, thank you for the offer. So at this point, there's a variety of things we can do with this. What is the pleasure of the board?
Go ahead.
Carolyn, go ahead.
Just a follow-up question. On your retaining a qualified third-party monitor, that's part of your deal, obviously, with Eversource. Do you expect that to be completed by your status hearing in December?
I would expect so. I mean, Mr. Santullo has had some communications with that individual. Perhaps you can speak a little bit more in terms of what.
So the third-party monitor is, something that Eversource is requiring me to do. Obviously, we'll have our own monitor. Mainville and Blasting has their own monitoring and their own monitor there. But, Eversource wants extra insurance with the third-party monitor. And that would only be during the blasting in the easement, so there's blasting before it and after it. Sorry about that.
And what about the pre-blasting surveys? Would those be completed?
I don't expect those are going to be completed by December. My understanding is that Mr. Santullo is going to conduct those over the winter.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what this board is asking for is if we can get some sort of a concrete agreement or a permit, I guess, from Eversource,
Right.
by January.
And how close would you be by your court date in December?
Well, I mean, things I know that we will have completed by December we will have the third-party monitor retained. That person will be in communication with Main Drilling about coordinating their efforts. I mean, I would say there's some possibility we have a permit from Eversource by that time.
I'm with you. I want one. I would like the permit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a possibility. I can't say with certainty.
Are you set? And then if you are, Carolyn, then Mike was next.
Yeah, just, I think, we'll need to get a better understanding when everything's gonna happen, whenever that is gonna be, right? Bottom line, but the concern, I guess, right now is, what do we do with the site the way it is right now? I mean, Mr. Santullo doesn't wanna go in there and disturb anything, but yet, we have residents that expect something to be cleaned up in there. Am I misreading that, or?
Well, I think there's at least the city councilor was alerting that to us as something that he thought, it was broken and needed to be fixed. I think that's his expectation.
But I guess from the developer's standpoint, why should he go in there and put all these preventive measures in place when they're not ready to do all that blasting?
Well, I think that the issue is specific to the silt fencing that had already been put up.
So that
and
needs to
had
be in there
fallen in some
regardless of
areas.
whether they're ready to blast or not?
Yes, they were. It was a perimeter fencing that was put in actually before he started any work on the site. It was one of the first things you did, because that was what was required of the SWIP. So you followed that, put the fencing in. But now, over time, some of those stakes have fallen for whatever reason. Some of the fence is sagging. And that was what the council was saying needed to be. He recognized that as, that's not being maintained. It kind of slid and fell and needs to be repaired.
So, Mike, are you kind
Well,
of,
I mean, I guess if I want me to redo it, I'll redo it, but I'm saying the purpose of that, the purpose of the erosion control is to control land that is disturbed. you know, so, you know, when you have dirt, heavy rains, dirt's gonna run down the hill, this stops that, right? What we have now is trees, ground cover, grass, you know, we have natural erosion control is what we have right now. So there really is no point.
Jim,
It
do
would
you
be,
wanna jump
it's a
in?
wasted effort, really.
Jim.
And I would have to disturb the ground in order to do it. I mean, if you want me to do it, I'll do it. I mean, that's,
I couldn't agree more with the applicant. Erosion control needs to go in prior to the disturbance of vegetation. Vegetation has been restored in the last 6 years. It's fully restored to wherever it's gonna be naturally. When you bring equipment up there, you put the bucket on the ground, before that bucket goes to the ground, that is when the silt fence has to be in place. Currently, they're not disturbing it, and until that point, there is no need in any specification you do, you'll read that verbatim. Vegetation disturbing starts the point when erosion control has to be in, just prior to it. Have to be in, you know, for something that's reestablished. So in the tail end of it, when you're removing your silt fence is when the growth is back in, when you put down lawns and the lawns are established sufficiently. Then you can pull up your silt fence and hay bales, okay? This is the part that, you know, some people may be talking out of school, they should be talking with the engineering department and have a better background to it. In regards to the retention of the professional services by main drilling and the third party, I think that's all I would like to see is some letter of intent that may resolve our indifference between the applicant and the company he's gonna retain to move forward. And that'll be sufficient for myself to know that we have the driller with his own third party doing the survey and doing his own check, and then the third party that the Eversource company wants to have to protect their interests. Once those are on board with a letter of intent from the applicant that they're gonna retain them for their services, I think that should be sufficient.
So, Jim, just to make sure I understand, the general idea of giving them a short enlargement to show that type of progress, and then we can sort of time out how much time to give them, is that works for you, and you're thinking to give them enough time to get the things that you just talked about? And then have them come back and say, here you go, and then we as a board can say, okay, from this point on, we can foresee you can be finished in X amount of time, and let them loose. Is that kind of where you're going?
Yes, that's correct. I would think the letter of intent should, one, for the third-party consultant, tell them that our initial intent is to probably start in the spring of '23, all right? And then the main drilling and blasting, the letter of intent of a contract would be to start immediately and give a timetable of, 4 to 6 months to do pre-existing surveys of the existing foundations in the area and monitoring. And at that point, all the pre-requirements for drilling and blasting will have been met contractually, and it's just a matter of executing, calling the corresponding people to the project when necessary.
So if we set a date in January, by that point, you would have all of those things that Jim just talked about.
yeah.
Plenty of time, right? You'd show up and you'd be like, hey, listen, I've got this and more maybe, and here's our timeline, and, you can convince us that we can get her done.
Yeah.
That works for you guys?
It does.
Yes.
Jim?
Yep.
Okay. So if we looked to our first meeting in January, whenever that is,
January 10th.
my goodness, January 10th, 2023. So one potential way of resolving this is to, when does the subdivision currently expire?
End of this month,
All right, so the
September 30.
So the subdivision has been continued to September 30th previously. One way of dealing with the situation is to continue the subdivision to January 31st, 2023, with the date of January 23rd for you guys to come in and just say, hey, this is what we got, and this is how long we need, and onwards. In best case scenario, right, nothing goes wrong, Eversource doesn't back out, you get everybody lined up in a perfect world?
Yeah.
All right, how do people feel about this? If someone feels good about it, I'd take a motion.
Make a motion to extend the deadline to January 31st, 2023, and have the applicant come back with a status at the January 10th, 2023 meeting?
Wait, January 10th, 2023.
January 10th?
20, when's our
January
meeting?
10th.
Our two meetings in January are the 10th and the 24th.
Okay. So January 10th, Caroline, you're thinking? All right, so there's a motion on the table to extend the subdivision completion date to January 31st, 2023, with a status report of the applicant and his attorney in person coming to us on January 10th, 2023, to give us a status and a firm, hopefully, completion schedule.
Thank you very much.
That is the motion by Carolyn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mike. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you very much,
Thank you very
gentlemen.
much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
See you next year.
We have reached Planning Board Director update. Tina.
Yes, members of the board, so just to recap for our next meeting, which will be on the 27th, we will have the continued public hearing on the 216 New Boston Street special permit site plan review filing. We'll have the continued public hearing on the LBOD proposal. We'll have discussion of expired construction completion dates for 3 Sherman Terrace and Crossman Road. Right now, that is what we know will be the agenda for the month, for the meeting. And the only other thing to let you know, or just to remind you, we'd love to have you join us at Thursday evening at 6:30. The Recreation Department is sponsoring the first of 2 public workshops as the city attempts to update its open space and recreation plan. We'll be sharing some maps and information about parcels that are owned by various entities in the city, discussing specific recreational facilities, and hopefully getting feedback from residents on what they, what they think about the current facilities, needs, what we're doing well, what we could do better. And there will also be a survey that will be published within the next day or two that will be available. We're going to try to blast that out and have a lot of people fill out the survey, ask many of the same questions about what you think of the recreational facilities in Woburn. What do we need more of? What kind of improvements, what kind of activities people would like to see. So I'd encourage you, if you can, to come to the workshop on Thursday. And if not, I will certainly do 2 things. I'll email everybody on the planning board a copy of the survey when it does come out publicly, so in case you want to fill it out. And I'll keep you apprised of the date of the next workshop, which will be October 27th. And that's my update.
Wonderful. After that, we have approval of minutes for the August 23rd, 2022 meeting. I know that Bob and Mike will not be able to vote on them, but the remainder of us can. They were in our packet. Does anyone have any comments or questions regarding those minutes?
Motion to accept.
Motion to accept the minutes as submitted by Dave. Is there a second? Second by Jim. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor, 2 abstentions. That motion carries. All right, is there any other business?
Seeing no other business, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the September 13th meeting, planning board meeting at approximately 9:52.
Motion by Bob. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dave. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you all very much. See you in 2
Thank you.
weeks.
A late night.